Hello and welcome to the Cult Vault podcast, your dedicated podcast for uncovering the darkest corners of cults and coercive control. I'm your host, Kacey, and I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for tuning in. Your support fuels our deep dives into these critical issues. Before we get started, a word of caution. Today's episode may contain discussions on abuse, including graphic descriptions of abuse, and covers a variety of human rights violations that may be triggering for some listeners. Please consider this as a trigger warning and proceed with caution. I'm thrilled to announce that I'll be appearing at CrimeCon UK in London on the 7th and 8th of June 2025, and again in Manchester on the 27th of September 2025. Join me and a host of world-leading experts, advocates and noisemakers at the heart of the true crime community. This is the UK's biggest true crime event, and you won't want to miss it. Use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, for 10% off your tickets. And remember, there are flexible tickets and payment plans available to accommodate everyone. This incredible event is sponsored by True Crime, and it's always my favourite weekend of the year. I hope to see some of you there. And for those who want even more from the Cult Vault podcast, you can access early, ad-free content by supporting me at patreon.com/thecultvault, where every pledge not only gives you exclusive access, but also directly supports the continuation of this work. Thank you again for your support and your listenership. Now, let's unlock the vault. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. I am your host, Kacey, and today I'm bringing you a slightly different episode where I'm speaking to two former detectives, Australian-based, Peter and Scott, also known as Watching Two Detectives. So hi, guys. So excited to chat with you today. Thank you so much for joining me. Scott, would you like to go first in introducing yourself?
My name is Scott Rogan. I retired as a detective inspector in the New South Wales Police Force 10 years ago after 25 years, and recently started podcasting with the next person you'll be here.
Case, thank you for having us. My name's Peter Hogan. I'm the co-host with Scott Rogan of Watching Two Detectives. Like Scott, I was a former, retired now, New South Wales detective, 22 years with the police, retired as a detective senior sergeant. So Scott and I had we've known each other for probably best part now of 24, 25 years. So this opportunity's come to us with Watching Two Detectives, and it's quite a story how it's come about. Look, thanks for having us. It's quite a pleasure.
I have been looking forward to this conversation with Hogs and Rogues, as you call it, which really makes me laugh. I think it's like a sketch show that you two have Hogan and Rogan as your last names. And I know that I asked you this before, but do people comment on that? Did they comment on that when you worked together in the force?
Oh,
Nah, never.
Never. Go on.
And you know, Case, this is the honest truth. We'll probably go into it. We had a trial homicide investigation, and it went to trial, and obviously Scott was in charge of the matter, so it was Rogan, Hogan, and then the Crown was Grogan. I kid you not. So yeah, that is an absolute true story. So if you want to get Hogs, Rogues, and Grogues, it's a true story.
Yeah, I think I made the comment on how stressed the court transcriber must have been during that session, trying to get everyone to take it right. So
Hang on.
How was it that each of you became detectives? Was that your original goal for the two of you, or did you kind of enter the police force and organically find yourselves in those roles?
For me, it was the last one. I didn't go in wanting to be a detective. We have quite a unique unit here in New South Wales called the Rescue Squad. And they do a lot of stuff that Fire Brigade you see in many other countries that Fire Brigade do. It's sort of almost like a military policing equivalent of engineers in the military. If you don't have a unit for it, give it to the rescue squad, they'll fix it. And, car accidents, cutting people out. And I wanted to be in that. And I was for a while, but as I got further into my career, after 4 or 5 years, I thought I want to get into the serious stuff. And that's how it started for me.
Yeah, Kacey, honestly, I kind of always wanted to do it. It was one of those things, I think, you start general duties and, walking the beat effectively in your two blues with us for New South Wales. That was really, really good. I always wanted to be a cop and to do that. And once I started, I think, I was looking at the detectives and I was pretty certain after a short period of time that that's the path that I wanted to go. So, look, I was just fortunate enough to be able to get into that position and to be able to be a detective. For me, that's what I wanted to do, and I was quite lucky to do it.
I often find that when I speak with former detectives or retired police officers, that it's like a family thing. It kind of often runs through different generations. So does either of you have like other family members that are members of the police force or were members of the police force?
My uncle was in the Australian Federal Police, my mother's brother, and there are, going back over many years, there are cops over many generations going backwards, including the first Rogan that got sent over from England, who happened to be an Irishman, shock horror, that you would send the Irish away. Once he got out of his sentence, he became a constable in the colony.
Well,
sadly, he was sacked for drunkenness. So,
Surprise.
surprise.
That's such a twist of fate, though, that you get released and then become a part of, like arm of the law.
Well, it was here at one stage. So yeah, the first police force in Australia were ex-convicts.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, you say that's all that was here at one point, but to you, both of you in the height of your careers, that might have felt like that was still all that you were coming across all of the time, just dealing with some of the most heinous crimes you can, like, I couldn't even imagine some of the stuff that I've heard the two of you have been investigating throughout your careers, just on your podcast and in our previous conversations. I couldn't even make some of these things up. It's absolutely wild. But when was it that the two of you first met one another?
I got transferred to Fairfield in 2001. I'd been promoted to detective sergeant. I came in from the robbery and serious crime squad, and Hogan was one of the team, 2001.
Yeah, so I started at Fairfield in 98, and then I went into the detective's office probably in 2000 with this after the Sydney Olympics, because predominantly the police stations then just ran on a skeleton staff because the majority of the police were sent all over Sydney to do the Olympics. So pretty much after that, I come back to Fairfield and did a really short stint in anti-theft, and then I was straight into the detective's office. So, it was quite good. It was what I wanted to do. So I was just blessed to be able to do it, I think.
Yeah. And sometimes when you watch movies of, like two detectives that are partners with each other, they're like brothers, or, they're like family to one another and their bond is unbreakable. Is this the type of partnership that the two of you had, or were you like a team of detectives all working with each other?
Oh, there's a whole team of us, but I think Rogues and I just kind of bonded at that early stage. And look, he was definitely a mentor to me because I was only, a really junior constable in the office. But in saying that, the majority of the cops or the detectives in our office were plainclothes constables. And you come from general duties, you go into the D's office and you're not a detective. but you're not wearing uniform, you're wearing plain clothes. So
Right.
it's that very initial stage, and we were quite junior police in our office because the majority of people had moved on, because Fairfield at that time was pretty much like near on a crime capital of Australia. It was out of control. And being neighbouring to Cabramatta, lots of drugs and gang problems throughout the southwest Sydney, and especially in Fairfield and Cabramatta. So, over the years, as soon as people did their time at Fairfield, got the hell out of there. And I think it was just one of those rare occasions where officers, an office per se, you get a group of people in, they work there for, a period of up to 5 years, 6 years, and then they move on, and then the next generation comes in. So I think Rogues and Clive come in at that stage pretty much at the same time in 2001, and it was that generational change that come about. So we just kind of ended up doing jobs together, and he was pretty much my mentor from there.
When you say generational change, do you mean that there was like a different way of doing things by the time the two of you became a detective?
Not, I think that generational change had changed later, or probably mid to late 80s and early 90s, pretty much so, didn't it, mate?
We had huge change around the Royal Commission time. Yeah.
So that was the bad old days, if you wanted to say that, but that was the mid to late 80s, essentially. And in the 90s saw a progressional change, but definitely by, the 2000 stage, a lot of those old police have gone, and it was, the younger people coming into the detective's office. And that's what it was like at Fairfield. If you were based on the North Coast and you're in a beautiful location, your detective's office was top heavy, so very senior. Whereas, when you're in the Southwest, no one wants to be there. So that's where you go to learn, and you learn quick. Otherwise, you're out. It's either sink or swim. But I wouldn't have changed it for the world.
And I know that there are several significant cases that you cover on your podcast, Watching Two Detectives, and also in the conversations that we've had previously. But I wonder if you could talk the listeners through some of the significant cases that you recall from your time working together, that are maybe ones that you've covered on the podcast or ones that you haven't.
Or ones that we plan to.
Or ones that you plan to, Scott, yes.
I mean, we first started to this idea that we would talk about some of the jobs that we've done together. Mostly, it's going to develop more than that. But we were certainly, in our first 3 seasons, started with 3 jobs that we worked on together. I mean, season 3, which has just been released and gone, all the episodes out, is probably the most stressful period in my life, taking control of critical incident investigation where 2 young men died in a stolen car whilst being chased by the police.
Wow.
Which then set off a riot in that suburb for more than a week. So processing a crime scene at 2:00 in the morning while bricks and bottles rained down upon us, and then essentially not being able to go into that suburb to talk to anyone afterwards was sorry. I mean, critical incident investigation to root cause analysis, essentially. But so you're looking at the actions of the criminal actions and actions of police. So if police have been in the wrong, I could possibly be looking at criminal charges for them as well as people in the stolen car. And I'm in charge of the lot. And then 3 years later, presenting that to a coronial inquest which is mandatory because it was a death in custody. So, a phone call at 10 o'clock at night sort of set 3 or 4 years worth of work up for me. And yeah, the media around that was just insane.
I think if we spoke about like our season 1 case, that was the murder of Michael Furlong. That was back in 2002. Michael was purely in the wrong place at the wrong time and was murdered essentially by what we call in Australia a forensic patient. So he was found not guilty on the grounds of mental illness and was placed into the care of the Mental Health Review Tribunal. So this case was harrowing in the fact that Michael and his brother were out shopping for electrical components because Michael was an inventor and he was actually out he was working on a component to have set up in the car that would stop people falling asleep. He wanted to try that because he was always on the road and he was coming across, motor vehicle accidents all the time. So that's what he was trying to do. So him and his brother were in a particular store and unbeknownst to them, someone caught their eye and they left the store and they drove over to Smithfield. It was only about a 5-10 minute drive and him and his brother have gone inside to the electrical store, spent a short period of time in there anyway. They've come back out and the offender walks up to them and says, "Sorry, do you own this black car over here?" And they said, "Oh yeah, why?" And he goes, "Oh mate, I'm terribly, terribly sorry," in a posh English accent, like really like private school accent. And he says, "I'm terribly sorry, I've bumped into the front of your car." And they've gone, "Yeah, right here, no worries, show me." So he takes them over and they're looking at the car and they go, "Well, man, I can't see anything." And they proceed to walk around the car and he's like, no, come back to the front. It's down the front. You have to get down the front bumper bar, mate. I've touched it down the front bumper bar. So Michael can't see anything. So he's effectively then leaning down looking at the base of the bumper bar. And at this stage, the offender comes behind him and pulls a Bowie knife out, stands over the top and slices his throat and then lunges at his brother. And he's chasing his brother, trying to kill him as well. His brother manages to get away, but Michael only stumbled a few steps and passed at the stairs of the electronics store, almost to the point of decapitation. So it was just a horrendous crime. So at that stage, sorry, mate.
Sorry, Hags. That kind of homicide is rare, certainly in Australia. Usually you've got some connection prior, even if it's two blokes sitting in a pub at the same time. And we had one this week where here in Western Sydney where a well-known businessman was hit from behind and died as a result of what we're calling a coward punch now. That you can put that connection together. This was just totally random, wrong place, wrong time, picked out by this guy.
We, upon starting this, were thinking, if we're going to tell these stories, we have to make a solid attempt and a fair income attempt to contact family, because we both said to each other, look, if we did this and family rang and said, "Why didn't you speak to us first?" it'd be devastating. So I started to go to the old Facebook because the police database didn't exist anymore for us. So go to Facebook and look, I found a Luke Furlong, and we knew Michael's son was named Luke, and Luke was 10 or just 11 at the age of when his dad had died. And there was quite a lot of media at the time. And, Luke was interviewed by the media and, it just showed how upset he was, like any normal, 10-year-old boy would be that had lost his dad. So anyway, trolled through all these Luke Furlongs, and I'm looking at faces and I'm going, you know what? Scissor, paper, rock, I've got to take a punt. Did that, sent a message, and Case, within 2 minutes he ran. And yeah, he's gone. You're not going to believe this. He said, ever since I've grown up, all I ever wanted to do was meet the police that, the detectives that investigated my dad's murder. And he said, you're not going to believe this, but he said, I reached out to a podcast in Australia, and he said, my dad's case is very unique. It's not just a straight murder. There's all these twists and bends. And he said, they wrote back to me and said, I'm too busy, mate. No, can't do it. And that was 2 weeks before we contacted him. So he was ever so grateful. He ended up having his mum and Colleen. She joined us on the phone, and then they said, yep, we're in. We want to do this. No problems. So we ended up Zooming with them shortly after. We set a date. In case we spoke for them for 3.5 hours. We couldn't believe it. Hey, Rogues. It was just, it was something else. It really was. And Luke at that stage said to us, I want to come down to Sydney and meet us. And we both kind of looked at each other as we're doing now on the screen. You don't really know what we're thinking, but I think we both thought the same thing. And it was, nah, mate, we'll come up and see you guys. So, we went up and spent the weekend with them in Queensland. And, we ended up speaking, I think, for another 2 hours. We recorded some extra info, and poor Sarah had, hours upon hours of editing to go through, but it was well worth it. They're very happy with how it turned out. And I think, we were extremely nervous being our first podcast and our first series, that for us, it had to be that the family was happy with it. And if that was, and that's all we achieved, and we were happy with that.
Because sadly, in a lot of these cases, or most of these cases, victims' family lose their voice. The lawyers take over. The court case happens. When we speak to Luke and Colleen, they're sitting in the back of the court, totally oblivious to what's going on. They don't know. They can hear the words, but they don't know what's going on in the court in front of them. And they haven't told their story. For 23 years, they haven't been able to tell their story. And we've given them that chance, and we think it's pretty powerful in what they say.
It definitely is.
Telling the story in a different way from the victim's family point of view, those that have been left behind.
Yeah. I think as well, when you say that the victims lose their voices, a lot of the time when there are true crime podcasts that don't actively seek, permission, or even kind of just to inform the victims that this was what the podcast creators were thinking about doing with a particular case. A lot of the time you can read stories about victims who, when it kind of happened when the newest kind of dramatized Dharma series came out, and the victims and the family members were saying, every time we think we've healed, or every time we think that we have moved past this, there's another piece of media, there's another story, there's another thing, and we don't want to relive this anymore. We don't want to be re-traumatized by this anymore. But those wishes are not really factored in, I suppose. But it sounds as though the approach that the two of you took meant that if you reached out and the family came back and said, we don't want you to talk about our father and our husband's murder, do you think you would have moved away from that case?
Hard to say. I'm glad we didn't have to make that decision.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a difficult one, because we're also trying to tell our stories as well. But
Yeah.
we're also aware that there are other people involved in this that have got far more skin in the game than us. But yeah, look, it's a difficult one, and we'll probably get to that point one day.
Well, we already have.
We haven't got.
Well, we had with one particular case. Yeah, we have with one. And look, that was involving a police officer that was murdered at Fairfield. We reached out to his family.
I had forgotten about this.
And his family respectively said, no, they just exactly what you said. Every year's an anniversary and it still gets brought up, and then you have major anniversaries, and they just couldn't go through it again. And we said, that's fine. We're leaving. We're not touching it. Wanted to come back to us and speak about it and tell his story, then we're here. But yeah, we're not going to touch it. And yeah, so it is a fine balance. But when you've reached out and they've said no, pretty much you say no.
Yeah. Well, that's season 1 of the show, and it's a remarkable season. It's so well produced. So I suppose at this point we should give a shout out to our good friend Sarah Ferris.
Sarah who?
Yes.
Sarah Ferris, a longtime friend of the Cult Vault podcast and somebody that I love to get together with when we have our annual Crime Con get-togethers. Sarah's podcast, Conning the Con, was one of the really vital pieces of kind of education that allowed me to identify this underlying link between all of these abusive pockets of society, which is what I believe to be coercive and controlling behavior, because it's explored in Sarah's podcast, Conning the Con, about how her sister fell victim to a con artist and the tactics that this individual used in order to gain money from Sarah's sister were some of the tactics that you would find in abusive relationships and cults and so on. And that kind of brings me nicely into asking the two of you if there are any significant cases that you worked on where you think coercive control played a major part in the outcome of the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll just be careful. We'll say the young lass's name. And I say young lass, Melissa was 29. And, she had daughters. But she fell victim to a friendship that developed, and her friend was married or in a relationship, but in a relationship that was based purely on coercive control and being manipulated and controlled in every way, shape and form, so that he controlled her, and they explored supernatural ideology, heavily into black magic and the cult, and he gained this control over Melissa, and his partner Angela was a part of it. So he was effectively controlling Angela to allow him to control Melissa, and that was setting up this demon spiritual aspects with Melissa, saying that she was possessed and that he had to do certain sexual acts to cure her. And both David and Angela would be party of, leaving demonic voicemails on her, voice recordings, on her telephone, and leaving things at the front door, and just allowed them to control. So he effectively controlled both girls, and he would be having sex with Melissa because he had to take the demons whilst she watched in the room. That is just horrifying, but that is what coercive control can do, because not only did he control Melissa, he controlled his wife to allow him to do that and be part of it.
And sadly, we would run across this is quite regularly. And I'm not trying to diminish the level of offending here, but in more of the run of the mill kind of cases, domestic violence where it's gone, he hasn't been killed, but their domestic situation is horribly controlled. And especially at Fairfield, we have a high number of immigrant communities, and a lot of them are that very patriarchal, structured communities. So the men rule with an iron fist, literally. So we saw that all the time, and a lot of sexual abuse comes around with coercive control, especially with kids. In child exploitation, we call it grooming, but it's a form of coercive control. And yeah, well, we'll get to it a bit later on where I've come to in what I'm doing now, and that's really prevalent in that.
Yeah, so it's it's taking it that next step from domestic violence, into different spaces where it's controlling people to get what they want, and it's just the level that they go to. Melissa's murder is harrowing. It's chilling.
You tend to find, and you will find if you listen to more of our feedings that come up. Jobs at Fairfield were never easy. There were twists and turns constantly with everything that we did, and the murder of Melissa is just bizarre. Just as some of the things with if tomorrow never comes with Michael Furlong was bizarre. I've never worked in a place like Fairfield for the twists and turns. There's always something around.
And it's unfortunately not uncommon to see, especially kind of in cults and destructive groups, particular set of tactics used to kind of indoctrinate a person to a point where they can then be deployed on behalf of the leader or leadership to carry on the recruiting and the indoctrinating and oftentimes the exploitation of people that they bring in as well, which almost sounds like what happened here with Melissa and the wife.
Yeah, well, she was befriended by her, and they actually met through another mutual friend. But yeah, the offender definitely pulled the strings from Angela to pull the strings with Melissa until he was in it, and then took control of it. And that was the circumstance even through the evening where she was murdered by him. Case, it's just horrendous, yeah, it really is.
And again, very common in the child sexual exploitation field, where they're getting the offenders are getting their victims' friends in through the victim. Talk to your friends. I've got this money. Look, I've sent you $500. Does anyone else want any?
Well, I've read serial killers and serial rapists, I suppose, how oftentimes children and pets will be used as a way to make somebody appear safer than they would be if they were on their own. So men might drive around with a child in the back seat, or might drive around with, like a friendly looking dog. And then if they pull their car over and they say that they're having car troubles, or like, oh, do you know where the nearest rest stop is because my child needs the bathroom or needs a diaper change or a nappy change, just as a pretense to really setting up a criminal offense. So again, like, I can see how, if my friend was saying to me, come to the pub and do a pub quiz, I trust my friend, I'm going to say, yeah, I'd love to come with you and do a pub quiz, which really is so insidious in that kind of way of word of mouth, kind of creating trust through the people that we admire and trust the most.
Yeah. And many of these characters are are very good at what they do. You look at the work that you've done in cults, looking at cults, and the reading that I've done for different bits and pieces, and I think, how do intelligent, highly respected people fall for this garbage? But they do, time and time and time again, because the person that is controlling them ultimately is very good at what they're doing.
And it doesn't take a long amount of time. In Melissa's circumstance, David convinced her about the demons and convinced her that he could cure her, and was sleeping with her within a very, very short amount of time. And she didn't want to do it, but she still did it because of that control. So
that's
it's not
so
a long
often the
time.
way.
It was so short.
Yeah, the cult leader will create the sickness or the problem or the issue and then tell the person that they are the only one that can solve that for them, which is, it's very complicated, and it's so nuanced. And I think that's why, without really kind of looking into this subject or this area, it's really hard on the face of things to understand how that could ever happen to a person. But that kind of brings us into, I suppose that I should ask, first of all, you're tentative in talking about Melissa's case and kind of withholding a full name. Is this because you've attempted to contact her family about the kind of decision to tell her story in podcast form?
Yes, absolutely, Case. Absolutely. The initial conversations that we've had with her family is that, they're very keen for us to tell Melissa's story. So we're just being a little bit cautious around her. But preliminary stages at this stage. But yes, definitely they're on board for us to share, her tragic murder. Yeah, it will be a really special and really emotional pod, I think, knowing what we know without saying too much. But yeah, definitely.
Well, you mentioned before, Scott, that kind of case and the cases that you worked on previously that did have elements of coercive control kind of set the path for the work that you're doing now, even though you're retired from being a detective. So what does that mean? It's all very cryptic.
Yeah. When I first got out of the cops, I went right away from anything to do with the investigative world. But then I sort of realised that I had a fairly unique set of skills, and people need them, even in a private sense. So I've done some work for anti-corruption commissions here in Australia, but I've settled working for an NGO that cares for kids in care. So I don't know what it's like in the UK, but here in New South Wales, the old wards of the state, or I guess it was the old terminology, where for whatever reason the state needs to step in and take care of the child or the young person, they go out to these to contract with these NGOs, and it's usually faith-based organisations. So I work for one of those, doing investigative work, mostly around staff, making sure that staff are doing the right thing, sort of an internal investigator. And we have a scheme here in New South Wales called reportable conduct. So we report certain classes of offence to an oversight body, and there's databases now. So we had a Royal Commission in the late 2010s here around institutional responses to sexual abuse. So churches and faith-based organisations, scouts, all that sort of thing, and how they dealt with allegations. And time and time again, they found they just moved people on, which didn't solve the problem. You just ended up with the same offender in a different setting. So reportable conduct stops that. Databases capture this stuff now. And if you're dangerous in one organisation, you don't get employed anywhere else.
Yeah, that's needed just all around the world, isn't it? That would just...
Sadly, though, because we're an Australia-wide organisation, it's not Australia-wide either. So because we've got state borders. New South Wales and Victoria are really taking the lead on that, and the ACT to a lesser extent, but there's some other states that are too far behind. One in particular that hasn't even come up with a scheme yet. And we're talking 5 years post-royal commission. Get your shit together, Queensland. It'll show that.
So I suppose that makes me ask how effective you think the new coercive control legislation for New South Wales is or isn't yet, because it was only commenced on July the 1st of this year, 2024. Yeah. So should we expect it to, kind of like it has over here in England and Wales, a really long time for it to be effective in any way?
I think so. People are still getting their heads around it. I'm not convinced that the cops have got the resources to do what the Act is asking them to do, because there's things like financial abuse. It takes a lot of man hours to pick that apart. It's going to be hard, and it's not going to come to detectives. These offences aren't going to come to detectives who have got the ability to unpick this stuff, but it's
right.
We would never have got them at Fairfield because we're too busy we're in the middle of a gang war at one stage where we had 10 homicides in 8 months.
Wow.
So, we weren't getting to armed robberies because we just didn't have the bodies to do the homicides that we had coming in, let alone anything else. So, and I'm not sure that the court quite understand it yet because it hasn't really been tested. And right, I think they're moving in the right direction. I'm just not convinced at this stage that it's 100% right. Look, I hope it is.
It's definitely on the right path. I think it's just going to be labour intensive for the cops to prove the offence. And, that does sound like a little bit of a cop-out, but it comes back to the ability of the police to ask the right question, but also for the victim to have the proof necessary to say this has been happening for this amount of time. That's, I think, more the problem case. I think the financial side, I think that's easy. You can show that, but it's the other things that whether mum never kept a diary to say all these things that every Tuesday night she wasn't allowed to go out, or she was told to stand outside. Do you know what I mean? It takes a lot of that evidence gathering and proof to say, well, this is our proof for that. This is how we prove that. I think that's the complex part of it.
Yeah. It's certainly one of the hardest crimes to prove and prosecute. I am hopeful that it is a step in the right direction, as you've both said.
Absolutely.
And hopefully, if there are countries or states in certain countries that have had these laws in place for longer, then hopefully those countries implementing their laws now can look at what we needed to amend down the line and have that already included in legislation once it commences, instead of having to have a couple of years where they reflect on the statistics of the, arrest levels and the prosecution levels and then think, what's not working here?
Sadly, don't do enough of it, though. It's you and I do it off a Google search. Politicians don't. So, it's just madness to try and reinvent the wheel rather than look across the fence and say, hey, look, the UK's doing this okay. Let's adapt a best practice model here. No, we go our own.
Gosh, but I could talk about this type of stuff until I'm blue in the face, especially after the recent election results that have just come over from the States. But that's a conversation for another day.
So here's something for you to think about, Kacey. In the environment, should we be looking at a disruption model rather than a prosecution model? So let's think about the way we deal with terrorism. We disrupt. and we stop it from happening and we disrupt it and change their plans. Not necessarily always prosecute because we can't get the evidence, but we stop it from happening. So are we too locked in on prosecute at that criminal level? Should we just be looking at disruption?
Yeah, it's kind of like if we should be proactive or reactive because, I feel like sometimes it was kind of like there was a case over here with two young girls named Holly and Jessica who disappeared from school, and they were found, a while later in a large dumpster. And it was like a really haunting case for our country and I can still see their pictures, a picture of them two together, because it was just all we saw for weeks. And it turned out to be the caretaker of the school that had harmed and had killed the girls. And that's where our DBS checks come from, which is like a check that you have to go through to work with children and vulnerable people. And it will flag anything that you have on your criminal record. But that's a reactive thing that came after the fact. This person who did have a criminal record should never have been working in a school to begin with. And that's without even the difficulty of finding criminals that have yet to be, identified for their criminality. And they are working in schools, and they are working in churches, and they are working in libraries and all these places where they will have access to children and young people. So I understand completely what you say when we, like the Health and Safety at Work Act that we have over here came after a massive disaster and a huge loss of life. So it's reactive again. I know we can't anticipate all of the things that might go wrong or all of the things that may happen, but I think, having a search done on you before you work with children, it kind of is common sense to me, and I believe was something that should have already been happening anyway.
We do have the same thing in New South Wales, in most states of Australia, working with children, and reportable conduct, the scheme that I was talking about before, oversights all that. So you get that working with children check from in New South Wales oversight body, and they've got a good database now after 5 years, and it's not just criminal checks. It's, well, hang on, this person got sacked from this organisation because there was queries about him with children.
Yeah. I mean,
the working with children check.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, just as a way to, it's just taking more measures to protect the most vulnerable people that we have in our societies. But
that's that disruption model that I was talking about. So can we do something similar with coercive control and domestic violence? Should we be knocking on their doors and say, listen, chap, we know that you're belting your wife. Stop it, or we're coming back. Do we go that far? We've done it with criminals in New South Wales before that were considered high risk. Do we look at exclusion orders? Who knows? Let's be creative about it. But because I'm thinking what we're doing at the moment is not seem to be working. We're up to more than one woman in New South Wales a month being in Australia being murdered by a domestic partner
every 4 days this year. So on average.
Wow! Oh my gosh!
So
clearly
we're not. What we're doing now is not working. So let's try something else.
That's a wild statistic.
It is. The usual political response is, well, we'll make the maximum penalty higher, which is great, but the judges don't give the maximum penalty to anybody. So all you've done is put a bigger tail on their parole.
Well, it's kind of, that goes back to what we just talked about. You've got to be able to identify the crime, arrest for the crime, and prosecute the crime before you can give someone the maximum sentence.
100%. 100%.
Oh my gosh. That is so frustrating.
Yeah. If you make it too hard, too complex, to either make the arrest or prosecute, it's pointless. It's the internet. How do you enforce it?
I was going to say, Case, domestic violence, the police can't arrest their way out of it. It has to come with generational change, and it's the guys that have to lead this and speak up and tell your mates, mate, it's not on. You don't do that. What you're doing is right, mate. Let it be. What you're doing is wrong. Stop it. Stand up and correct it, because that's the only way that this is going to be. And you've got to raise your sons to respect women, not to treat them this way.
Yeah.
It has to be generational change. It has to be, because the cops can't arrest their way out of this. It's impossible.
No, especially when it's everywhere, and it seems to be kind of like impacting most people at some point in their lives on kind of like a spectrum of severity. Some people will feel it very mildly, and some people will experience it to the point where they might not live through the experience, which is some of the more extreme cases that the two of you have experienced in your careers. And the two of you are actually now, I believe, on a board of directors for a foundation that does try to tackle this issue.
Yeah, we are preparing to try and tell the story of Lisa Harnham, who was a Canadian that was thrown off a 15-story building in the centre of Sydney one morning. 13 years ago, Hoax.
Yeah, 2011. 2011.
And we reached out to the foundation that was named after her to talk to them about it. And we ended up on the board. So they're doing some great work, and we just needed to be there and help as best we can. And, our experience in the cops and, it's the right thing to do. There's some great initiatives coming out of the Lisa Harnham Foundation here in Sydney. And, but again, it's the old story. There's not enough money. There's not enough DV workers around the place. There's not enough places to take these women to safety. When you've got a leg.
Yeah. There's the website is a fantastic resource as well, lisahf.org.au. It's a lot of information on women experiencing domestic abuse, but it does really go into coercive and controlling behaviour as well. And there's a lot of different services that the website offers. So I'll be sure to put a link in the episode description to the Lisa Harnham Foundation website in case anybody listening thinks that may be of help to them or people that they know or people that they work with. And I know that we spoke off the record about some of the information regarding Lisa Harnham's case, and that took us into a conversation that I found was really prevalent in this particular space, and that was how many cases you both were kind of attending that resulted in murder because a person had decided that they were going to escape that abusive environment. And the two of you said that it was almost every case that you went to where a woman had been murdered by her husband because she decided she was going to leave.
Yeah. Oh, the statistics will tell us that the first 3 months of making that decision to leave or trying to leave, most of the women are murdered within that 3 months.
It's the most dangerous.
The most dangerous time. And most women will try 6 or 7 times to leave that relationship before they actually successful. And once you start to investigate these homicides and do your victimology, it's just, it's generally within that time.
So heartbreaking. And it really kind of brings us back to having more protective measures in place for people, people to be like, okay, I need to do this. How do I do it? I mean, most people I speak to, they don't even know if there are services that they can access or who they would call in an emergency. So I think, just having more information out there, making this kind of stuff more available in the public realm, more education around, what abuse is, what it looks like, how it can manifest in different relationships and areas of life. I'm just an idealist. So in my head, I'm like, all of these things are possible, but I'm sure that there are some organizations and people and politicians and detectives who have tried to do this over their entire career and just really have been shouting into the void. But it's just really heartbreaking to think about all of the cases of people that are trying to leave and they never will. And I imagine that will speak very heavily to a lot of the listeners that tune in that are survivors of kind of coercive control and cults themselves, because it's often the case that people cannot find a way to leave their destructive group.
There, I guess, Case, when, if there are people that are listening, please try and seek some, DV support services. Please go to the police and ask to speak to a domestic violence liaison officer. And we have those here in Australia, and I'm sure that the title may be different in England and, in America and across the world, but it's still the same situation. It's still domestic violence, and please have those people there. Please go and seek them and get some support, because you don't have to fight this fight alone. And you can't keep living this way too. You have to get out, because, our victims, no doubt would have been fearful of, lay ahead of them. But, I'm just hoping that, against all hope, that, they weren't sitting there thinking of the day they were going to die, because that would be harrowing, Case. But unfortunately, in the cases that we've done, that was circumstances that have had that. They knew that ultimately
he's going to kill
happen. Yeah. And it quite did. And that was Lisa's case, with Lisa Harnham. Lisa was leaving, and she made it out the front door, and there's a harrowing image that was captured from CCTV where the offender grabs her and puts his hand around the mouth and drags her back into her unit. 41 seconds later, Lisa's dead, and she's fallen 15 floors. So it happens. They've just got to be so careful, but please seek help.
There are people out there that can help you. One of the biggest things for a lot of women is, how are they going to survive with the kids? Because he earns the money, he's got the cards and all that sort of thing. There are people that can help you. You've just got to ask for it. And I sort of need to link this conversation with what I do now into the child protection space. The vast majority of the kids that we have in care have come from domestic violence backgrounds. And the trauma responses and the issues that these kids are going through. There are other issues. Drugs play a big part, and mental illness plays a big part. But there's always domestic violence. So this environment's not good for your kids.
Well, it's systemic. It's everywhere. And I was going to ask as well, Scott, earlier on you mentioned season 3 and how difficult it was to record that season because you're reflecting on the hardest part of your life. And then we kind of went on to talking about season 1, but I just wanted to ask, I feel like there's this kind of masculine, patriarchal, patriotic, stiff upper lip mentality that's portrayed in TV shows and movies about how you have to be as a dark and brooding detective. I imagine sometimes you need to be dark and brooding because you're working with such difficult cases, materials, victims, families, information, pictures, CCTV. But when you're working on a case like the field riots, and that is such a highly charged, difficult, personal experience for you, do you talk about that? Do you go and access support for that? How do you work through that as a professional, but also as a man working at a higher level in, like, classically a very male-dominated industry or sector?
Yeah, we don't deal with it particularly well. Given that I was actually running the show, it was very hard to sort of blow that steam off to anyone. And I still had other work to do, which sort of, again, at Fairfield, it didn't stop. So it wasn't as though I was taken away from everything else and had to just worried about this. I had all these other bits and pieces going on. And traditionally, and I'm in this boat, we sucked it up and kept going and didn't really talk about it. Eventually, like a leak in your roof, it finds its way out. And that's not so much Macquarie Fields, but that cumulative effect of 25 years is the reason I'm out.
Right.
You know, you think about stacking coins or stacking anything and you keep adding to it, eventually it's going to fall over. And that's where a lot of cops find themselves. Because of that, as you said, that masculine sort of stiff upper lip, we just got to battle on. We haven't been good at looking after ourselves.
And honestly, there wasn't the help there neither at that time. It's definitely changed to an extent now. I think, Case, a lot of it now is the hierarchy trying to cover their ass to say that they offered different levels of assistance and, the officer said no, so here, sign my notebook type of situation. There wasn't the well checks. And so well checks, if you are in a high stressful position within the police, so, if you're in homicide or if you're in child sexual abuse squads, they would have mandatory well checks. Yet the normal detectives at the police stations didn't. Generals' duties didn't. And it wasn't until, you're at these higher level jobs that, like homicide, that you're supposed to have the well checks. But we never did. I got a well check on my first day when I got there. And then after that, they were, sorry, we're not doing this anymore. It's going back to the police. The police will arrange it for you, and never did. So, it was, they just don't exist. They didn't exist then. Yeah. They did, but you weren't giving them, It was.
I mean, I was a negotiator for nearly 10 years and we were going through all that all the time, and it didn't pick it up anyway either. So, a lot of the things that you do in that space is all self-reporting. So, we hide it. I guess the thing about it, if in the middle of the Macquarie Fields, if a psychologist had come to me and said, I need to sit down and talk to you about what's going on, I'd tell them to fuck off. I've got too many other things.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And also, if other people are saying, oh, well, they offered me that, but I didn't want it, I didn't think I needed it, then I think sometimes, like, the conformity mentality is like, well, if he's not doing it, then I'm not doing it. I don't want to be, I feel like we're talking a lot about how there are services that victims can access, but also we need to make sure that people that are working with this subject material are also, being looked after and being taken care of and being encouraged to access support as well, because vicarious trauma is a serious thing. And you've just mentioned there, Scott, about the coins piling up until you couldn't do it anymore. So yeah, that's.
But you know what, Case? It's not. You go and do the job, and you're fine. But it's the little things, like when you get home, the TV, the ads go too loud, the phone keeps ringing, the dog next door's barking, blokes keeps mowing his lawn. It's this noise, that noise. It's the little things, and then you lose. Your body is just that stressed that if you've got little kids and you're trying to tie shoelaces, you can't do it. And I'm sitting there, my little dude. I'm going, what the hell is wrong with me? I can't tie a goddamn shoelace. Can't get the shoe on his foot. It was the craziest, smallest little things that just snap. And you just lose it over nothing. You have things that
you don't peak and trough anymore. You just stay at that high level.
Yeah, well, that's your nervous system, isn't it? In a constant state of stress, like ready for you to have to like fight or flight or freeze or fawn or whatever terms people are throwing out.
I'm not going to sleep tonight because you've got a phone next to you and that's going to ring at any moment. You're going to have to go to work.
Oh my gosh, that's what it was like when my babies were small. I'd be like, well, there's no point going to sleep because as soon as I fall asleep, one of the babies will wake up crying. And then you're like, you get into this like period of being sleep deprived, and then it's like crazy making, and you wonder if you're going to actually, get through it. And that's just like that's a very natural thing, having babies and raising babies. But what you two are working with is absolutely not natural. So I can't even place myself in a situation where I'm under that much stress.
Well, extrapolate what you're talking about with the babies over 20 years.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you.
Well, it was just the little things, that just you snap and you just, Jesus, you can't keep doing this. And I think in that time, it wasn't just Fairfield that was so busy because we were there for a period of time and you went elsewhere. But like during that time there, our coroner brought in that basically all deaths detectives had to go to. So, even your routine ones, someone passed because they're elderly or someone passed because, they're gravely ill, we would have to attend. So our your workload, I guess, was very heavily. It was very, very, very constant, and death was a large part of our job. Going to
always die 9 to 5, like 2 o'clock in the morning. You're getting phone call.
Yeah, suicides, and ruling on the suicides aren't suspicious, and drug overdoses and accidental deaths and sheer out tragedies. I bet that also comes. That probably also comes with like working with families or working with individuals over a period of time, and then finding out that something tragic has happened to them down the line, and like you worked with this. Like I imagine that there are informants and all sorts of things that that happen in the detective world that I am absolutely not privy to whatsoever. But you've both had such an extensive career. Like you said, Scott, you have these special skill sets that are highly transferable outside of the police force and detective work. And all of these cases of vulnerable women being harmed by predatory men has led you down this route of continuing your detective work in a capacity that is with children and on a foundation that supports victims of domestic violence and coercive control. So I feel like the more I talk about coercive control, the more I talk about men being really awful towards women. So again, I just want to make the point that coercive control, although it is statistically a gendered crime, it doesn't always present in that way. And there are all different variations of
gender and age and perpetration and women harming men that you will come across. But typically, it's men harming women. And as you are two men and you are identified that it is men harming women, I don't feel like I'm so much on my kind of feminist soapbox just saying like, you know, why can't men take accountability? Because I feel like you two here are in a position where you're trying to make some of that change.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make it. That argument that you know it's not always men is usually one of those ones that you get. It's a defensive argument. Yes, you're 100% correct that it's not always men that are doing these things. Women do offend. The statistic is so heavy the other way. That the easiest change is for men to get their act together and stop doing it. And for us as men to start to have those difficult conversations with sons and friends, sitting around in the pub, and the bloke on next to you is constantly harassing your girlfriend on the phone. Cut it out. Leave her alone. That's just bullshit. Have those conversations.
Yeah.
Don't shy away from it because it could be your daughter.
Yeah. Well, I feel like things are changing. My partner had a work due a few weeks ago, and one of his co-workers, after a few beers, decided to slap the backsides of a couple of female colleagues, and he got fired for it. So you know? I don't know what he was expecting to happen, but yeah, that was, you know, one person said it was sexual violence, one person said it was harassment, one person said it was physical assault. So there were loads of different interpretations, but all in all, it was definitely unwanted, unconsensual contact on, you know, like a person's body. So he lost his job.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 seasons of watching Two Detectives that are out now for public consumption. I believe they're available on all major podcast players, and knowing Sarah Ferris, probably all the minor podcast players as well. And you have a couple of cases in the works that you're both interested in putting together. There's a whole other story about a show coming soon called The Badmiral that we could go into. But again, that's another story for another day. But I will put some links in the episode description to watching Two Detectives. I feel like I could sit here all day and speak to you both about your career experiences, like what a journey you've both had.
And you can see it in the colour of our hair, and the lines on our face. And you know what? Even after everything and how we sort of ended up, and I don't think I'd change it.
Yeah,
I don't regret for a moment the work that I've done.
I think I'm pissed that we're not still doing it because I loved it. But maybe now we've got other doors that are open to us, which, you know, is an extension from that. Like, I guess we've done our time with that. Maybe we can help in another way that we couldn't have helped there.
Which is kind of what drives us in these domestic violence spaces, and you know, the work that we're doing.
So, watching Two Detectives, available on all major podcast players and probably minor ones too. I'll put links in the episode description to all of the places where people can find and I look forward to more content. I look forward to chatting with you both more and seeing you at CrimeCon and coming to be on your podcast. Thank you so much, Rogues and Hogs.
It's more often, Kacey.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
Thank you so much. Take care and enjoy the rest of your evening because you're in Australia.
Past my bedtime already.
Well, Peter asked me if I was going to join him for a breakfast beer. He actually said a breakfast beer. So
a brekkie beer. So have you got one?
I don't. I've probably got a cold cup of coffee lying around somewhere. That's about it.
Well, That's half a brew, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's 11 o'clock. You can
It's
have a
now
beer at 11.
when we started.
Well, no, I thought we would have one at the end.